Um, I've got a couple of just short little readings. One is from Hell's Angels, The Strange and Terrible Saga of the Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs from 1967. And it gives a little bit of insight into things. It starts off, by the middle of summer, I had become so involved in the outlaw scene that I was no longer sure whether I was doing research on the Hells Angels or being slowly absorbed by them. I found myself spending 2 or 3 days each week in angel bars, in their homes, and on runs and parties. In the beginning, I kept them out of my own world, but after several months, my friends grew accustomed to finding Hells Angels in my apartment at any hour of the day or night. Their arrivals and departures caused periodic alarms in the neighborhood and sometimes drew crowds on the sidewalk. When word of this reached my Chinese landlord, he sent emissaries to find out the nature of my work. One morning, I had Terry the Tramp answer the doorbell to fend off a rent collection, but his act was cut short by the arrival of a prowl car summoned by the woman next door. She was very polite while the angels moved their bikes out of her driveway, but the next day she asked me whether those boys were my friends. I said yes, and 4 days later I received an eviction notice. Actually, their visits were marked by nothing more sinister than loud music, a few bikes on the sidewalk, and an occasional shot out the back window. Most of the bad action came on nights when there were no angels around. One of my most respectable visitors, an advertising executive from New York, became hungry after a long night of drink and stole a ham from the refrigerator in a nearby apartment. Another guest set my mattress afire with a flare, and we had to throw it out the back window. Another ran wild on the street with a high-powered Falcon air horn normally carried on boats for use as a distress signal. People cursed him from at least 20 windows, and he narrowly escaped injury when a man in pajamas rushed out of a door and swung at him with a long white club. One of the worst incidents of that era caused no complaints at all. This was a sort of good-natured firepower demonstration, which occurred one Sunday morning about 3:30. For reasons that were never clear, I blew out my back window with 5 blasts of the 12-gauge shotgun, followed moments later by 6 rounds from a .44 Magnum. It was a prolonged outburst of heavy fire, drunken laughter, and crashing glass. Yet the neighbors reacted in total silence. For a while, I assumed that some freakish wind pocket had absorbed all the noise and carried it out to sea. But after my eviction, I learned otherwise. Terry the Tramp had been up all night and was groggy from pills and wine. It was a cold, wet day, and on the way to my place, he had stopped at the Salvation Army store and bought a shaggy remains of a fur coat for 39 cents. It looked like something Marla Dietrich might have worn in the 20s. The ragged hem flapped around his knees and sleeves were all trunks of matted hair growing out from the armholes of his Hells Angels vest. With the coat wrapped around him, he appeared to weigh about 300 pounds, something primitive and demented, wearing boots, a beard, and round black glasses like a blind man. Let him answer the door seemed like the final solution to the rent problem. So that's an excerpt from his Hells Angels period. And then I've got one here. It's a story. It's from Fear and Loathing in New Hampshire when he's on the campaign trail. And he's done this before. This is not his first campaign thing. He's written lots of stuff about the crazy New Hampshire stuff. 4 years ago, I ran this road in a different Mercury, but I wasn't driving then. It was a big yellow sedan with a civvy-clothes cop at the wheel. Sitting next to the cop up front were two of Nixon's best speechwriters, Ray Price and Pat Buchanan. There were only two of us in back, just me and Richard Nixon. And we were talking football in a very serious way. It was late, almost midnight then too, and the cop was holding this big Merc at exactly 65 as we hissed along the highway for more than an hour between some American Legion Hall in a small town near Nashua where Nixon had just made a speech, and the airport up in Manchester where a Lear jet was waiting to whisk the candidate and his brain trust off to Key Biscayne for a think session. It was a very weird trip. Probably one of the weirdest things I've ever done, and especially weird because both Nixon and I enjoyed it. We had a good talk, and when we got to the airport, I stood around the Learjet with Dick and the others, chatting in a very relaxed way about how successful his swing through New Hampshire had been. And as he climbed into the plane, it seemed only natural to thank him for the ride and shake hands. But suddenly, I was seized from behind and jerked away from the plane. Good God, I thought, as I reeled backwards, here we go. Watch out, somebody yelled. Get the cigarette! A hand lashed out in the darkness to snatch the cigarette out of my mouth. Then other hands kept me from falling, and I recognized the voice of Nick Roon, Nixon's chief advance man for New Hampshire, saying, "God damn it, Hunter, you almost blew up the plane." I shrugged. He was right. I'd been leaning over the fuel tank with the burning butt in my mouth. Nixon smiled and reached out to shake hands again, while Rue muttered darkly and the others stared down at the asphalt. The plane took off and I rode back to the Holiday Inn with Nick Rue. We laughed about the cigarette scare, but he was still brooding. "What worries me," he said, "is that nobody else noticed it. Christ, those guys get paid to protect the boss." "Very bad show," I said, "especially when you remember that I did about 3 king-size Marlboros while we were standing right there. Hell, I was flicking the butts away, lighting new ones. You people are lucky I'm a sane, responsible journalist. Otherwise, I might have hurled my flaming Zippo into the fuel tank." "Not you," he said. "Egomaniacs don't do that kind of thing." He smiled. "You wouldn't do anything you couldn't live to write about, would you?" I said, "You're probably right," I said. "Kamikaze's not my style. I much prefer subtleties, the low-key approach, because I am, after all, a professional." "We know. That's why you're along," was the response. So I thought those were kind of cute to share. And do we have somebody else up next? Or, Ian, hand me that paper while I'm up here before I have to jump down again. This is something when I was doing a little bit of research for today that I found interesting. It's something that I hadn't realized. And so many quotes, there's like popular sayings and things that you've been hearing all along. And I never knew so many of them came from quotes of Hunter S. Thompson. And one of them, I've heard various varieties of this one, but life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." And it totally fits now, and I've heard that forever, but never knew what it was. There's another cute one. "I hate to advocate drugs, alcohol, violence, or insanity to anyone, but they've always worked for me." And life has become immeasurably better since I've been forced to stop taking it seriously. It never got weird enough for me. Too weird to live, too rare to die. And there's just a whole lot of fun things like that you hear all the time, and they're all from his journalism stuff. Yeah, it's pretty cool, I thought. Anyway. Thanks for letting me share.